I'd like to tell a different kind of fair trade, right? One of the things that I noted, the director, Rob Cameron, when he mentioned the products for fair trade, they were all food products, right? But that's not the only story that fair trade has to offer. And today, I have an opportunity to be a campaigner for fair trade handicrafts, something that you don't hear a lot about. And I think it's something that we need to talk about, particularly what is the potential, right? There's very limited support happening right now for fair trade handicrafts. It's usually just the producer networks like us that are struggling to get into the market, struggling to get recognized. And perhaps it's time we started changing fair trade a little bit so that we can expand the products that Plus is showing as fair trade. Not just bananas and coffee, what about handicrafts? So I'm really excited to be here to share that story and to talk a little bit more about the potential for fair trade handicrafts, right? Okay, just a little bit about what my presentation is going to be about, right? A little bit about why fair trade handicrafts is important. What is the economic power of handicrafts in Africa? Because a lot of people seem to think that agriculture is what is driving the economies of Africa. But there's another side to that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Why is handicrafts important to Africa? What is the potential for that? And then I'll go into the fair trade model. How has it started to bring change in terms of handicrafts? How is it making a difference economically? And then I'll go into the economic power of African handicrafts in terms of what is the potential? How big can this become? And how much of a change can it bring to the producers and to the small-scale producers? And the role of fair trade, what is our role as, you sitting there, as me in producer networks, Max Havela, different certifiers, NGOs, government. What is our role in trying to make that reality happen? And that's why my last slide is about people and possibilities, right? A lot of what I'll talk about is going to seem very small scale as compared to what you've seen in terms of Max Havela bananas and coffee and tea, right? But I think my role here today is to talk about the possibilities. How do we make this a little bit bigger, right? Okay, so I will not assume anything. When I talk about handicrafts, I'm talking about something that is made by hand or by simple tools and not with machinery. And it's something that is not necessarily mass-produced in a manufacturing kind of setup, right? And handicrafts is something that really has artistical or cultural influence. This is what I mean when I talk about handicrafts. But there's another way to define it, especially when it comes into the market. This is what you know as gifts and living, right? Lifestyle products, candles, glass, fashion and accessories, household decor, textiles, and a long list of examples of items that you use every day in your household and that people buy every day in the supermarkets, a lot of which is coming from a super mass-produced manufacturing setup. But this is what I mean when I'm talking about handicrafts, right? So why is handicrafts important? And there are a number of reasons why handicrafts is important. I'm going to first start with the economic scope. I've lived in Kenya all my life, and handicrafts is considered part of what is the informal sector in Africa, right? And there's very little support going to the informal sector, both from our government and from NGOs, because a lot of people like to focus on agriculture, right, and on industry. This is what is formal. So handicrafts fit into something we call the informal sector. And that's something that has been ignored, yet it has such a large contribution to the economic empowerment of the continent. For example, it says now in sub-Saharan Africa, the informal sector contributes between 48 and 72% of the gross national income, right? It's higher in the countries that are struggling, like Zimbabwe, which would have about 72%, and much lower in the stronger economies, like South Africa, that would have 48%. But imagine that, 48 to 72% of the gross national income. So it's informal, but it should not be ignored, right? Second, in terms of employment, it's a fact, particularly in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, that the informal sector is responsible for about 60% of employment, right? And about 80% of new job creation, and particularly in times of economic hardship, right? So when people cannot get work in the formal sector, they always fall back to the informal sector. So you'll find a lot of the times during hard economic times, and that's why Zimbabwe has about 72% contribution to GNI, people fall back to the informal sector. Right? If I can just look at two countries in particular, it's something called Juakali in Kenya is what we call the informal sector. This is what it contributes to the economy. It's between 10 and 20%, right? And in South Africa, 10 to 12% of the whole economy of the country, right? So it's something that should not be ignored. And then what happens is right now, because it's still informal sector, there's not really anybody collecting relevant data or statistics to find out how much is this thing contributing to our economy, because very little support is going to it. So a lot of the information we get, even from the World Bank, even from the ILO, is what we call estimates, and that's why I'm not able to give you a specific figure as to how much it contributes, right? Now, another thing that makes handicrafts important is handicrafts is where Africa has comparative advantage, where we have the power to compete, right? And this is for a number of reasons. I mentioned earlier, handicrafts is based on cultural and artistic nature, right? Let's be real. There are a lot of sectors that Africa is never going to compete with China, with Asia, with India, with the US, right? I don't imagine that there'll come a time where Kenya will be competing in terms of nuclear science, right, as an example, or in terms of having a satellite on the moon studying how Mars can become a new place for us to live. This is not going to happen. We have to look at the sectors where we have comparative advantage. And it's a fact that handicrafts does have comparative advantage. Firstly, because of the unique cultural elements of our products, right? And a lot of the large commercial organizations have started to see that. And I'll give you an example. The Bogolan is a fabric or a textile that comes from West Africa. Right? And I'll move a little bit here. It's similar to what I'm wearing today. And Nike has designed a special edition sneaker. Nike, a big brand, that's based on the Bogolan, right? So it's something that's commercially viable, and they're selling this shoe for hundreds of dollars in large quantities, right? So the people who are the owners of Bogolan, are they getting a percentage of that? Are they getting a benefit from that? I think that's the question we need to ask ourselves. And that's not the only example. A famous fashion designer, Alexander McQueen, I think some of you might know him, the late. He showed in one of his collections about 2 years ago a new design, a new fabric, a new thing that he's going to commercialize. And it was actually based on Ethiopian traditional weaving skills, right? So the potential to commercialize and empower people through handicrafts is very, very real, because large companies are starting to do that. I don't know if you've heard of the Maasai barefoot technology shoe, MBT, based on the culture of the Maasai. Oh, I don't know, the Maasai stand so tall, they walk like this, they step like this. And the shoe is based entirely on their culture and how they do things. And it's selling for hundreds and hundreds of dollars, right? How can we transform that to help empower the communities in Africa, right? So it's something that's really important, the unique cultural elements. Also, the skills are existing within Africa, right? So it's something that we can already do. We just need to upgrade it and scale it up into something that becomes commercially viable. There's the existence of raw materials. A lot of handicrafts are based on materials that are found and that are sustainable and found within our own environments. And one thing you need for handicrafts is people. I talked about it. It's simple tools, not mass-produced, not manufacturing setup. So mainly what you need is people. And this is one thing that we have a lot of in terms of developing countries. So this is one of the reasons why handicrafts is important, right? In terms of the social impact, I know a lot of people, when they think of poverty, they probably see the poor farmer that, you know, fair trade supports and some of the communities that are doing small-scale production and so on and so forth. But there's another side to fair trade, and it has to do with the poorer members of the community, those who don't have an education, who don't have capital, and who don't have land. And this is the target group for handicrafts. It supports the people who actually do not even have land to be able to do small-scale agriculture. So it is done by a lot of the poorer members of society. It's very cross-cutting in terms of urban and rural poor. We have a lot of people living in slums in the urban centers, and a lot of them are relying on handicrafts as a way for economic activity, or as a way to generate income. Obviously, the support of women. A lot of handicrafts are made by women and benefit women. So this is something very, very critical in terms of the social impact. And then the power of networks is critical when it comes to handicrafts. And I'll give you an example. As I mentioned earlier, handicrafts is considered part of what is the informal sector, right? So the formal government doesn't support the informal sector. So a lot of the support comes to these producers through networks, through small-scale networks that do umbrella programs to consolidate finance, through microfinance, through networks for business support, and not through the main formal structures that support other businesses, including agriculture. So this is where we have a role, because the power of networks in supporting these producers is quite strong, right? And lastly, preservation of culture. Just like we have extinction of animals and plants because of the environmental degradation, we do have extinction of skills. So handicrafts has a role in preservation of culture. A lot of these skills were learned and passed on from generation to generation. And we have a role to preserve them and keep them strong. Right? Youth employment in terms of supporting generational growth, and then intellectual and cultural property potential, right? Like I said with Nike, how can Nike bring back some of the benefits it's making from the Bogerland? All right, so just a little bit about fair trade and handicrafts. Fair trade has done something to support handicrafts, obviously still on a small scale, and how do we get it bigger is the question. There's been a lot of support to handicrafts producers, who by nature are small, micro, and grassroots producers, right? The producers are not always very well organized, for sure, and for a lot of them, this is a singular source of income in terms of how they make a living, right? In one way or another, handicrafts producers are considered marginalized. You know, you either work with people who are uneducated or don't have basic skills, or who are living or affected by HIV and AIDS, living in the slums. So in many ways, they are marginalized people. And then it's a very community-oriented activity. You cannot do handicrafts by yourself. You have to involve the surrounding community because the skills exist in communities, right? So when you define fair trade, essentially this is what fair trade defines. These are the kind of people that fair trade is supposed to support. So in a large way, the solidarity markets model has been empowering and supporting fair trade handicrafts producers predominantly in a very large way. And in many ways, firstly, the orders that come from the solidarity market have been very small, so that businesses that have 4 to 7 people or 7 to 12 people are able to place an order of 200 pieces a month, 300 pieces a month, 1,000 pieces maybe. So they've been able to build the small-scale producer to slowly increase their scale and slowly begin to empower themselves and increase their skills. So there's been a very strong role in terms of the world shops and in terms of the small shops that have been buying fair trade through solidarity markets. Through price and prepayment, right? I told you they don't have a high capital, these handicrafts producers. So having prepayment that comes directly through the fair trade solidarity market has been a great assistance in helping these producers grow. Lenient and understanding buyers. I mean, the solidarity market is based on partnership. It's based on understanding the situation. So when the producer said, okay, it rained heavily, so the wood did not dry. We cannot send you the products right away. The solidarity market has been very supportive in terms of helping create an understanding environment and understanding trade partnership, right? And that idea of long-term partnership, I'm not buying now, I'm going to continue to buy even as you grow and help you build your capacity to become a bigger producer. Obviously, now we've had some good success stories in soapstone, sisal, in sustainable wood and baskets, and that's an example of one of the producers. And we just did a survey of about 60 of our members and just saw some of the benefits that have come through the solidarity market. Over about 200,000 beneficiaries annually, right? HIV and AIDS support on a large scale. A lot of the producers are affected and have been supported. Over 10 million euros annually. Remember, it's a small figure. We've only just surveyed about 62 producers. And development projects that have brought improvement to the community, such as healthcare, schools and tertiary centers, water projects, and a lot of local government engagement, and particularly in areas of health and safety and education in the production, right? But now we need to move from that. We need to get into broader markets. How do we take handicrafts so that the story that I'm bringing 5 years from now is similar to what the CEO of Flow was saying? How do we now mainstream this, right? What is the potential of the market? Now, handicrafts has a critical role in terms of fair trade because the potential for the market is very, very large. I think we all know how the market is changing. Everybody wants something natural, unique, recycled, less mass-produced. This is how the trends of the markets are changing. So there's a potential for handicrafts to tap into that, right? There's a social consciousness that's coming into the consumer. Something that he said in his interview is, fair trade has a story to tell, and stories sell crafts, right? So the potential for us targeting this market is beginning to become bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Fair trade labeling, so far, there's no handicraft product that's labeled as fair trade in the market. So what is the potential to get that happening? A lot of the growth for fair trade has come because there's a mark on the product. In these bananas, there's a Max Havelaar mark. How do we get a mark onto the handicraft product so we can begin to identify ourselves in the market, right? The size of the market, the power to scale up, clustering, and use of small-scale technology. With our producers, A lot of them are small scale, but a lot of them can be clustered together to produce in mass, right? For example, where I come from in Kenya, we have one product that's the Kisii soapstone, and it's unique to Kenya, right? And what we can do with the producers is say, okay, this is the product we need to make. We need to make 1 million pieces of this. And that can be coordinated to help the producers tap into larger and broader markets, right? If you look at the size of the market, currently the EU has about 6 billion euros in the gifts and living, right? The contribution for fair trade in this market is negligible. It cannot even be calculated. Imagine if Africa got just 10% of that every year going back to the small-scale producers. Imagine what a difference that would be. In the US, the market is much larger. So the question is, what is the size of the market for Africa? Right? How do we take that and make it into something much, much bigger? I mean, we have had some success stories of producers mainstreaming. A producer called Made in Kenya has been selling for a long time to Top Shop, right, in orders exceeding 20,000 pieces. Gahaya Links in Rwanda sells to Macy's in the US in larger and larger qualities. Pure Swazi, which is a brand of Swaziland producers that has come together to consolidate, does orders of 30,000, 40,000 pieces. So the potential to scale up exists, and it's just a matter of us helping this tap into the market, right? And I'm going to end there, just with a food for thought. How do we get the story of handicrafts as big as we've gotten the story for fair trade food, right? So thank you very, very much.